All approaches are religious, including the anti-religion approach. Since being anti-religion is also a kind of religion, I beg your pardon, Richard Dawkins, you can't get rid of this stuff because getting rid of it is what bad religion is about. It's about getting rid of the nasty bit in social space. So the way you get rid of religion is usually in the key of religion. It's like Alice in the through the looking glass trying to run away from the house and she's always coming back. So just face it, we're living in religion space, so we might as well get it right. Let's have a nice religion space, right?
Greetings, future fossils, and welcome to episode 223 of the podcast that explores our place in time. I am your host, Michael Garfield, and today we are speaking the royal way, I guess. The agglomeration of subscendent junior holons. We are speaking with a fellow ontological they, Timothy Morton, about their wonderful new book, Hell, in Search of a Christian Ecology, which I feel absolutely blessed to have received in the mail as an advance reader's copy, which suggests that I have arrived as a podcaster finally. Tim is somebody I have been following for years and years and years, and whose work, as any regular listener of this program will know, has influenced and informed mine very deeply, in particular their prior book, Hyperobjects, which I constantly cite in my eldritch explorations of what it means to live in a world where we are often painfully aware of the greater structures and processes in which we play a part. Tim is also part of the wonderful Scenius of Rice University, along with Jeffrey Kripal, and the vector for our introduction, Eric Davis, who received his religious studies PhD under Kripal. And so there's something really weird and wonderful going on there, other than hurricane season right now. And actually, because of that, let's just talk a little bit about this amazing book before we get started. Hell is a marker of a profound shift in Morton's being. They've always been interested in the topic of climate change or, global warming. Why bother using a euphemism? And in this book, as we explore in this conversation, they talk about how their own initiation through physiological hardship led to a midlife religious conversion from which this book erupts as kind of an anthem for new, ecstatic, radically weird, postmodern Christianity that I simply adore as someone standing with one foot in the waters of mystery and the other in the quantitative headspace of science and technology. So, yeah, cannot recommend this book highly enough. And I just want to warn you on two fronts, the first being a legitimate trigger warning that we talk about a lot of really emotionally challenging and horrifying stuff in this conversation with our eyes open and our hearts open. I'm wearing my old tour t-shirt right now from the 2006 Love Without End tour, for those of you watching, as a way of reminding myself of the vibe that Morton is putting through here. The other warning is that this is probably the most comprehensive and intense episode of Future Fossils I've ever recorded, which is to say that I am grateful that we managed to touch on just about every one of the topics that I love to address in this show. And it was actually kind of hard for me to make it a Future Fossils episode instead of the first episode of the new series, Humans on the Loop, about agency and automation, because a huge piece of this book is an investigation of AI as a kind of interface with our own sin and evil, and crucially, the transcendence through immanence that we experience by bottoming out in the project of modernity. Again, those who have been listening for a while know that one of the big themes here is that the success of dominion over the living world as a project has radically backfired and plunked us into a domain of epistemic humility and indeterministic, or at least non-computable experience and life and contingency and weirdness. And yeah, so this is all stuff that we cover in this episode, and I am immensely grateful for it. And I hope that you love this and that you share it widely. And there's the glitch, there's the comedic failure there for you that we also talk about, the way that, you know, in the fall that we can embrace in the limits of our bodies and our material circumstances, therein lies the sacred. And so with that, I feel completely justified in passing the tray right now for Future Fossils and for the upcoming work I'm doing. If you like this show, if you like me as a person, if you like Tim, please support Future Fossils on Substack or on Patreon. I'm newlywed. I got kids to feed. And as Tim says beautifully in Hell, sacredness is the feeling of biology. You know, what else can we do but embrace this flawed and tragic, joyous thing? So I want to take a moment to thank new and enhanced subscribers, people who have raised the level of contribution over the last little while I was off getting married. Caleb Meredith, Frank Crooks, Tristan W., Kendall Jensen, Tay M., Pamela Shapiro, and the hundreds of other people whose continued donations cover my expenses. Enjoy this discussion, and I've got plenty of other wonderful conversations in the mix for you in the weeks and months to come, including the books across the room. But I'm really excited to be getting Robin Sloan, author of Moonbound, on the show here soon, and just an absolutely delightful fantasy sci-fi crossover novel that I think you'll love. So anyway, I think that's all the news that's fit to print. Oh, but actually, to get you in the spirit of all of this, I wanted to read you a quote my friend Tristan Gulliford recently sent me from Jim Carrey, which I think puts you in the right head space and heart space for the conversation that is about to transpire. I used to be a guy who was experiencing the world, and now I feel like the world and universe experiencing a guy. So there's kind of been a shift. You can join the game, fight the wars, play with form all you want, but to find real peace, you have to let the armor fall. You will only ever have two choices, love or fear. Choose love, and don't ever let fear turn you against your playful heart. We have a lot of fun playing in this conversation, friends, and here we go. Thank you. I hope that this conversation inspires you to citizens arrest the Exxon CEO or whatever, you know, being the biosphere, enjoying itself. Well, Tim, this is wonderful. First of all, getting offered to talk about Hell with you by your publisher was kind of a dream come true, because I first found you on Eric Davis's podcast, Expanding Mind, back in the day, and Eric's show deeply inspired me and got me into podcasting in the first place. And then this book is sort of like a tour of everything that I want to talk about on Future Fossils and like all of the major themes of this show. So I was thinking about this and I was like, my God, do I just stop Future Fossils after this interview? Is this it? Are we done? Have we said everything we need to? So anyway, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure and an honor, Michael, and I'm very grateful to you for having me on.
So, okay, I just kind of want to, we've booked ourselves a nice long slot here, and I feel like maybe the right way to do this is just to go through this book in more or less linear order, which means starting with your exordium, what the hell? And this provides some really useful context and acts as kind of an overture for everything you have to say in here. So why don't you lead us in?
Oh, sure.
Here.
Yeah. What you're referring to, Michael, is the preface. Now, normally a preface would be, 8 or 9 pages long. I'm writing another one for another edition of a book I wrote called Being Ecological. We're reprinting it, and I'm writing a preface right now for the American edition, and it's supposed to be 8 pages long, yeah? Then you've got the introduction, which can be a little bit long, could be maybe, 20, 30 pages. But this exordium is pretentiously called an exordium to make people read it. The original title was a preface you really ought to read, or something like that. Every other chapter, I'm saying, have you remembered to read this yet? And that, plus the introduction, is a good 100 pages. It's almost half the book. It's just the preface, which is very memoir and kind of first person. And the intro, which is very kind of content-based and is kind of pointing at what we're going to be talking about in the book a bit more. But, okay, so they say I'm a philosopher. I never would have described myself this way. It seems like an insult. Gary Snyder just said that I wrote philosophy, and a friend of a friend, he's a friend of a friend, and they said, hey, Gary Snyder said this. I was like, okay. And people do expect me to do it, but sort of what is it? Yeah. Well, if you look at the word, philosophy is really 2 emotions. Yeah, you've got philos, which is love, so that's easy. Then you've got Sophia, which is wisdom. And it's the DOM part of that word, Michael, that really spells out the fact that it's a feeling or a feel, as we might say now, rather than a set of ideas. It's not just a sort of set of instructions on a fortune cookie. It's a quality of being wise. If you're going to have to choose binary, is it a feeling or an idea? You say it's a feeling. So there's no ideas in the word philosophy. It's not about having ideas, actually. It literally is about feelings. And in fact, it's a little bit like this, and I say this as a 50-plus philosophy guy now. Aristotle says you do your best philosophy in your 50s plus, and I think I know the reason why. I think it's that you realize at some point that philosophy is about trying to not have ideas. You spend the first few years doing it thinking, I got to come up with some great ideas, and I did. You develop this concept called hyperobjects and so on. And then you sort of settle into, I don't dislike any of those things I came up with, but basically the part of me that was trained in deconstruction, the part of me that studied a lot of Buddhism, a lot, decades of it, and so on, kind of started to get a bit louder, and I started so think about it this way. You're driving the love car down the wisdom street. That's what you're doing with philosophy, right? It's the love of wisdom. So the love car's going down the wisdom street. And the lampposts are like the ideas. And you don't want to point your car at the lamppost, otherwise you're going to crash into the idea. The idea is to glide through. Yeah. And so what does this mean? It means you've got to trust your feelings. Little bit Obi-Wan there. You've literally, because actually this feeling versus idea duality is a fake duality. And I would suggest that it's part of this whole subject versus object, active versus passive, also master versus slave, which is the main template, the main one that's screwing everything else up, right? So if you don't like master versus slave, you might not like idea versus feeling. And it's more like there are polarity. It's like, okay, so a feeling is an idea from the future, right? A feeling is an idea that you haven't had yet. Like, why else do you do something like therapy, right? You're having a feeling, but you can't understand it. You want to put some words on it, right? The more intense philosophy you want to do, the further in you want to go, the more feelings you're going to be dredging out of whatever that is. I mean, in a way it's yourself, but in another way it's like everything you ever did and everybody you ever talked to. And thinking is always a team sport, and so is feeling, right? And so is living, right? Nevertheless, you're kind of dredging it out of something, and there's a lot of, if you're going to be honest about it, you want to you want to sort of spelunk or bungee jump into something quite heavy if you want to go further with your thinking process. And I wanted to go further with my thinking process because since I can only take responsibility myself for the world that I see around me with a straight face, clearly I'm not doing enough. I'm right about ecology, and the world is bursting into flame, and not every American has decided, hey, you know what? Solving global warming is the sexiest, most amazing, most fantastic thing I ever thought of doing in my life. I think I'm going to do it for Tim so he doesn't even have to get out of bed. And I'm MAGA guy, but Tim persuaded me to do it. Like, how come that hasn't happened? Because I didn't do it yet, right? Like, let's reverse engineer from the ultimate goal, which would be MAGA guy gets out of bed and does it for me, and citizens arrest the directors of Exxon for me so I don't have to do it, right? What was I doing wrong? Well, one thing I was doing wrong, I wasn't inspiring people enough. Accidentally, or possibly deliberately, I was making people feel paralyzed and kind of stupid, right? And it's not hard to do because these are very overwhelming issues. These are overwhelming, huge, big issues. These are issues that, because they're planet scale issues, literally make us feel small relative to how physically big they are, right? And the last time we felt like that was when we were tiny babies. And so here we are feeling like tiny babies, super, super regressed, but we've got to act like the most adult we've ever done in our life and get a planet scale movement together, right? So you got to kind of, it's not just walking and chewing gum, it's feeling like a baby and having to act incredibly mature at the same time, right? So I'm thinking, you know, I understand this actually because I'm a survivor. I'm just going to just come out and say it. So nobody else has to, right? I'm a mad old sexual abuse survivor person, but a lot of actual literal crime in my family and beyond. And unbelievably, part of it was connected to London mafia crime syndicates. And I wrote this memoir about my life with just objects, unquote, just like inanimate things. And it was like, what a relief. It's called The Stuff of Life. And like, no one's going to believe the real stuff. But then I had this surgery last year, and it was like LASIK for my soul. They cut my stomach open about 5 different ways. And, you know, like how your eyes reset when they cut your eye. Well, it was like that when they cut my stomach open. They discovered 5 hernias in there. And it just hit the reset button on me. And within a couple of days, I was writing this thing, which luckily hasn't been published yet. I wrote 100,000 words in 10 days. I'm like, right, that's it. I'm getting my own back. So I read this thing. And this tornado of revenge gradually widened its radius into a big old circle of mercy. Yeah. And then other stuff happened, right? But my big point is that we're watching grown-ups in the shape of oil corporations committing crimes on our actual bodies and our kids' bodies and other life forms' bodies, right? And we're really tiny. What does this remind you of? Do I need to spell it out? There's a huge taboo against even mentioning it. My mum was a social worker, and she was a very high-up social worker. She's constantly having to train her people to make sure they knew when they saw just one instance of something funny, it was everywhere in that family. You're only going to see the tip of the iceberg, but if they let you see the tip of the iceberg, it's everywhere. Yeah? It's everywhere in social space, but we don't talk about it, right? So you've got to get through some inhibitions here. And what are we dealing with? What are we dealing with when we're dealing with the basic boundaries between my body and my world, right? The thing called narcissism, right? The guy who was the previous president had disordered narcissism. Everybody needs a little bit of narcissism. As my Buddhist teacher used to say, everyone needs a little bit of relaxation. Everyone needs to feel good about this. The previous guy feels terrible, right? The previous guy is still at that stage, just desperately wanting to imprint on somebody. But somebody over the age of about 5 doing that is kind of Ridley Scott's Alien, which is called narcissistic personality disorder, right? Religion is the thing that deals with this. The thing called religion, whatever you think religion is, spirituality, whatever that is, deep therapy, right? Massage, body work, grief work, is dealing with the deep interface between something like my body, but also something like a squirrel's body, but also something like an oak tree's body, but also something like a single-celled organism's body. It's very interesting that when Freud has to describe the thing he calls the death drive, he actually breaks it down to a single-celled organism. I do actually think, since sentience is a thing that goes all the way down to at least to plants, right? This is an issue that it literally it's a religious issue, but that means it's also a squirrel issue. That means it's also a tree issue, a single-celled organism issue. It's an ecological issue because it's to do with the interface between the body and the biosphere that it grew out of, right? And these incredibly basic, surging things. It's nothing to do with some lovely, nice, hippie painting of nature from a while ago. This is real, and it's horribly visceral, and it's disgusting. And it involves horrible feelings of abjection and contamination and being poisoned, stuff that we really don't want to go. But we got to go there. And so the funny thing is, religion's holding a lot of pieces to help us with this, but of course religion's also sucking really badly. Like, we all know how religion is sucking, especially in the good old US of A, because when you get it wrong, that level is to do with inclusion versus exclusion, right? The default of any human group is that that group is a narcissistic personality disorder entity, right? Unless you do some really hard work, a group is going to be Donald Trump, right? And this means, like, in a group of over 3 or 4 people, that little group is a narcissist, right? That means that we've got to get a planet-scale action together and work really hard on not making it inclusion, exclusion, right? Religion also, luckily, is like that, right? Like, love your neighbor. The guy's giving you the granular how to not create a narcissistic group, and the guy let himself be scapegoated. It is also my favorite hobby. By every possible group. I love to get paid for it, I feel, to say the wrong thing in public. I'm probably saying it now. I also do it accidentally. I have this curb your enthusiasm ability to say the wrong thing in the very action of trying to say the right thing. And so it's kind of, I know this stuff. And why do I know? Because I'm a survivor deep from my past stuff, and I've been included, excluded in horrible groups as a kid. So I know what this feels like. I also know what it feels like to realize, like a lot of Christians in this country are now realizing, oh my word, I'm stuck in a horrible, toxic group. Like you could call it cult, but it's better to say a group that a group that still is a narcissistic group, right? A group that is about inclusion, exclusion, a group that makes you feel like you're full of poison and tries to kick you out if you are the bad one, right? If you're being treated as the scapegoat. There's a lot of people now, they call themselves ex-evangelical, which is a wonderful word. And they're talking about, literally, they say deconstruction, which is the thing that I actually do. So I accidentally wrote a book for you guys. I didn't know that you existed until I was in the middle of writing this book. And I also wrote this book for these British people. The reverse is happening in Britain, interestingly. The place where there really is a national church. And be careful what you wish for, Christian nationalists, because you're going to end up with the Church of England. It's going to end up being really boring. It's going to be all about cake. It's going to be boring. Yeah, boring and oppressive. But there's a lot of people actually getting into the Christianity precisely because of ecological issues. And I accidentally wrote a book for them as well, because I didn't know that when I was writing it. And my big point here is, where's that feeling, the good bit, the good feeling? Freud would call it the oceanic feeling. We've all had this feeling, whether it be some kind of vicarious, I'm coming up on MDMA feeling, or some kind of revelatory feeling, or I'm having a beautiful dream. It's that feeling, or Maslow, peak experience, yeah? We've had that, hopefully. A little bit what that's like, so falling in love, that kind of feeling, right? Where's that, right? Why do people like me spend most of our time making ourselves and everybody else feel paralyzed and depressed and evil? Page 1 of the newspaper, it says, big horrible fact that you didn't know X. And you're like, oh, God, no, I didn't even, I just opened the Huffington Post. I just opened my phone and there's this terrible thing. 10 what? 50,000 what? What? Now what? Right? So already you've got this hangover mind, like, oh God, what was I drinking, right? And it's actually also accidentally in the key of religion, the bad one. Like, it's in the key of the book of Revelation. Accidentally, the science, in its very scienciness, in its unadulterated, seemingly unfiltered rawness, is saying the same thing as giant dragon emerges from boiling ocean. I said, what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to do with this? So page 1 makes you feel stupid and tiny. Then you open up to the middle of the newspaper, and somebody who I'm going to call Eeyore, for libel reasons and slander, but also because it's a type. It's not anybody in particular. It's like a fate. Well, it could be actually someone in particular. But like Eeyore, Winnie the Pooh, a perennially depressed person, is basically saying, you're doing it wrong. You're thinking about this wrong. You're a bad person. You're not doing enough. or the government is evil, everything's evil, everything's wrong, your world is wrong, you're a holy person, but your world is wrong, right? So page 1, stupid. Editorial, evil, stupid and evil, stupid and... Did Martin Luther King stand up in front of 1 million people in Washington, D.C. and say, you have no idea how racist you are. You have no idea how paralyzed you are. We're never going to get this done because you guys suck. No, he didn't. He said, I have a dream, right? He opened up the future. When you say I have a dream, you've already won, because you're making people visualize the possibility that things can be different. Also, as a skillful minister, Dr. King knows that I have a dream also is the intimacy, right? In public. Like, when's the time you hear someone say that? It's when your best person wakes up next to you and they're like, oh, I'm having a dream. Or they're just falling asleep. They're like, oh, I'm having a dream. It's a very vulnerable moment. They're going into or coming out of sleep paralysis. If you're a psycho, you could kill them. They can't move. They're having a dream. It's the intimacy, right? And Dr. King was brave enough and trained enough to be intimate with millions and millions of people around him and in the future, being filmed, saying, I have a dream. Where's that? Where is that? Because that would get me out of bed, actually. That feeling of, oh my word, yes, solving global warming is the sex. And plus also, it's so intimate and personal, and it doesn't delete my little house, and it doesn't delete my little family, and it doesn't delete my little street. Like so much environmental writing is like, your little world is meaningless. Your little world means nothing, right? Because the other problem is that, again, it's this big group is a big bad group, and it's obviously bigger and badder than your group, and it swallows your group like Pac-Man, right? It's a bigger narcissist, right? This is fascism. This is fascist holism. Unfortunately, we've all been trained to say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but is it? It's just this funny thing we like to say to sound good. But is it really, right? How do you be like ecological at planet scale without thinking my little life is worthless, right? That's what Donald Trump's trying to make you think. Like the fascism is from a Latin word, the fasces, right? Which is like a bundle of sticks. And the stick is only strong in a bunch, right? We're a gang. We're a criminal gang, right? Ecological politics can't be about that. So I wrote this preface that's very personal because I need to go there first so other people feel like, okay, to go there. So I went there, like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to talk about all the horrible, disgusting, nasty stuff and how I use it, right? Then we're going to drop in the religion stuff, right, from the top level, right? And by the time you've done all that, it's like a roller coaster going slowly up the slope. And then the remaining chapters is whee down to the bottom.
Yes. Okay, so in the sense that this exordium is an overture, I feel like we've already danced around much of what I want to discuss with you. And I just want to touch on a couple of things and highlight them before we move on. One of which is how tickled I was that you brought up the Giger's alien in this. It's part of my own inner dreamscape. It stands as a symbol of the biomechanical hell that I find myself trying to reckon with at all times. And it's going to come back in this conversation, especially being as we are on the cusp of Disney's first Alien movie this year. And having, talk about weird childhood shit. I grew up in a Disney family. Like my dad worked for Disney for 20 years. So like the fact that this is, so growing up inside the machine of the insane mechanized capitalist monster. But one of the things I love about this book is the non-duality, the through full feeling of being in the, okay, let me just say, I have a trash can outside of our house. For the first time in my life, I have a mortgage, and it bothers me immensely because I am an itinerant, nomadic soul. And yet, in order to raise a family, I've had to make a compromise, and the compromise was to work in a scientific institution, the Santa Fe Institute, and in so doing, although I didn't last, but I lasted for a while, in so doing, getting a house. And on the trash can outside of our house, the serial number for the trash can includes 666. And I thought for a while, I was like, maybe I should I take a marker and make it 888? Like, it bothered me. But I was like, I have to just sit with this. And then, of course, there's Michael Schneider's fabulous coffee table book, Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, talks about the symbolism of each of the decimal numerals and how six is associated with the beast in the body because it's about being in three-dimensional space, and that it's the honeycomb, it's the cells of soap bubbles as they're pushed together. And so that there is this thing, and that this is something I just want to highlight in the conversation moving forward, which is the emphasis, as you mentioned, this thing about subsendence, about the parts being greater than the wholes. I think so. Okay, let me kind of all over the place, but it's hard after reading a book intensely not to speak from a place where everything you've said is connected to every other thing. So just forgive me, oh listener, for making no sense here. But this book starts in a rave, and you've got the rave poster by David Dorrell as the frontispiece of this book with the Our Lady and love. And it's been interesting to me how there's like a specific kind of ecstatic religious thing that springs up in groups that you point to that is found in the laser and smoke and techno spectacle of ecstasy-fueled dance halls. And then also I think back to college and my first experience with MDMA and how I remember realizing I'd smoked weed before, but I was like, oh no, this is the first time. This is a drug. Like, I am made of chemicals. And there's something that anyone who has that experience, almost anyone, I would imagine, maybe not everyone, most people I know either get stuck in a kind of nihilism, they become these sort of materialist, pharmacist type people who decide that we are nothing but, and therefore end up sort of chasing this peak experience, manipulating themselves in a way that, like you talk about, the body is the slave, and I am the demon riding this body, and so I am going to feel good. But then there's this other thing, which is the vulnerability, and more reading this book, you reminded me of one of my favorite all-time books, Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants, and the Evolution of the Noosphere by Richard Doyle. He's somebody else I found through Eric, actually. So I don't know. You've probably read it. If you haven't, it's a book about the way that he has reconciled evolutionary theory with a literary criticism of psychedelic trip reports and Advaita Vedanta. And so he's got this whole thing about how what he calls the ecodelic experience, because the words we use the language functions as an algorithm that programs your trip. And so what's really going on, it's not just the psychedelic, it's the ecodelic. It manifests the way that the self appears, it troubles or complicates the idea of there being a subject and an object, that things fold over into one another, and we realize that the self is not fixed, nor is it here or there. And
Michael,
so yeah.
May I go there?
Yeah, please.
I'd love to go there. I'd love to go right into the psychedelics for the benefit of our listeners here. And what you're saying is absolutely right. Of course, where people go, if they go into a kind of nihilistic or materialistic space, isn't necessarily the chemical's fault. It's sort of ideology's fault, right? It's that in our world, we've got subject versus object, which is master versus slave, and it's very hard to kind of unthink that stuff. Now, I've done like 30 plus years of serious Buddhism, and one of the things I discovered in Buddhism, doing esoteric, right, Vajrayana and Dzogchen, and the thing you discover actually is the thing that Hindu and Chinese and Tibetan medicine calls the subtle body, the yoga thing, that Nadi, Prana, and Bindu. You can say mindfulness in my line of work these days. In any university, you can say mindfulness. And it's okay, but you can't say prana. You can't say Nadi You can't say Bindu. When you do, it's like, oh, how quaint. Or we think you're a crazy person now and you're going to lose your job. But why? Because of this subject versus object, and Nadi, Prana, and Bindu are transpersonal, physical, and yet it's why they call it the subtle body, right? And I personally, I know they're real, right? People check themselves into mental hospital all the time having Kundalini without knowing what it is, yeah? There's a book by Stanislav Grof called Spiritual Emergency about this. So like, I've got this energy coming up through my spine and it's going out of my head. And it's like, it's the transpersonal aspect of it that you didn't cook it up. And it's going out the top of your head. Whoa, when you take a psychedelic, this becomes very obvious. I would argue that acid is like a vicarious experience of what is called poa in Tibetan Buddhism. How to eject, right, the videotape out of the video recorder when you die, right? You eject your consciousness out of the top of your head, and so you can pop it into another video recorder, and like that sense of I'm not out of body because you never were in your body, yeah, that kind of thing, in your body, unquote. And then I think it's quite right. So it's quite right that the U.S. Army decided MDMA is a PTSD drug, and as somebody with, I did just have PTSD, I have complex PTSD, continuing horrible abuse. I'm just a big old mess. I sound like I'm not. Or actually, I sound like I am. Anyway, as a PTSD drug, it gives you a vicarious experience of being okay. And what that is, in yoga or Chinese medicine terms, is all your channels are nice and clear and aligned, and your prana's all nice and... The prana is the energy flow, right? According to this, part of you is made up of little droplets of energy called bindu. It's really quantum theory, right? It's little wave packets called bindus, right? And the way they flow around is called prana, and the vector, the directionality, it's called nadi, the channels. And MDMA gives you a vicarious experience of like, oh, this is what it would be like to have knots in my nadis. This is what yoga's all about. I'm going to unknot my nadis, and that will enable me to connect to the divine. Yoga means yoking, right? And the result of yoga is that it's not that you know how to bend yourself into a pretzel. It's that you are able to click to the divine, yeah? Because your nadis are all nice and aligned and straight, unquote, straight, and your energy flows all nice. 99% of the stuff in your brain, in a way, is just subtle body activity. If you're a very intellectual person, I'm just going to say this for the benefit of people here. My Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Sokni Rinpoche, would at this point interrupt the conversation and say, look, you've got to tell them about the upwardly moving wind, Tim, right? There's this prana that circulates around just below your navel, and it should be just kind of rotating around like an engine. But if you're an intellectual person brought up in an anxious modern culture, you can make it kind of come up your central channel. And if it gets to your heart, you have major anxiety. If it gets to your throat chakra, you start to hallucinate. If it gets in your brain, yeah. And so he never teaches people advanced stuff, because the advanced stuff just happens by itself if you're able to get this prana down below the navel again. And so when I finally went to a teaching of his in Berkeley, I said, oh yeah, that, I know that. I'm already on SSRIs to help that. And MDMA is a super, super hyper SSRI, amongst other. It floods your brain with serotonin. It's, oh, wow, more than normal. I can let go, yeah. And this is why, and what you're saying about inside, outside, and self-other, in a way, this is why the word psychedelic hasn't done us a favor, right? They coined the word psychedelic when they gave a bunch of alcoholics LSD and they saw God, and then they didn't drink alcohol again. And it was a little bit in the, I don't know who thought this up or whatever, but in the idea itself is a little bit, you've been punished. You've been punished by having your reality ripped away, and now you're revealing your soul. Delos is reveal, the psyche is the soul, right? It's a little bit hinting at this mind-body dualism that can really mess you up. And if you're clinging to that idea, my brother has schizophrenia. He took a lot of acid for a lot of years and a lot of other things, and he got schizophrenia. And actually, funnily enough, people with schizophrenia are, in a way, people who really believe in dualism a little bit too much, right? They're like, there are voices coming out of the others, things, and I don't like it. Well, actually, your voice, there isn't a you for your voice to come out of. That's normal. But, in a funny way, people with schizophrenia, there's a lot of lionization of it, but it's not a cool thing. Speaking as the long-term brother of someone with long-term, real bad schizophrenia. Anyway, the word I prefer is not psychedelic. It's Aldous Huxley's word, phanerothine. Don't know if anyone's heard this word phanerothym, but the phanero bit means appearing or display. And the thyme bit comes from my very favorite Greek word, thumos. And this book is a lot about this concept of thumos, which is life, right? Not life as a concept, as a bios versus whatever. Is this thing alive? It's life, Jim, but not as we know it, right? That's bios, it's biology. And it's not zoe as in zoo, as in this thing should be in a zoo, and this thing should be looking at the thing in the zoo. This thing has a right to live, and this thing doesn't have a right to that. It's a juridical concept about distributing bodies in social space, right? This is thumos, which also applies to subatomic particles. It's the liveliness, it's vibration, quivering. It's the last syllable of the word rhythm, right? It means pulsation or palpitation, right? So phanerothym literally means life display, right? Display of life. You take the phanerothym, be it MT, LSD, MDMA, and life itself as a kind of quivering, vibrating, transpersonal, whatever that is revealed. I think that's a much more benevolent word for it, and it's why it's healing, right? Or potentially healing. It's not like a fish being taken suddenly out of the water. It's like a fish being plunged back in and realizing, oh, wait, I'm not a land animal at all. Oh, this is water. Wow. Or I'm thinking of it right now like this a little bit. I'm just going to say I did see God, talking of psychedelic. I'm not going to contradict myself, but not, because since about March of last year, I've been having this ongoing subtle body experience of being a born-again person. I'm so sorry. I'm connecting these things that are normally not connected together. Like born-again Christian and guy who can talk about acid. It's not normal, yeah? But like I say, I'm not a normal guy. And I know Kundalini. I've had Kundalini since 2008. It just happened because of meditating with Rinpoche. And you can tune into it and it unquoted gets stronger, but it doesn't. It's just like you're tuning in to this little pilot light. It's always on, right? I know what that is. And then this other stuff is happening in my body. Like I tell you, abused people have a lot of funny experiences, right? That then they sort of go crazy because they're having all these funny experiences. Luckily, I can put words on these experiences, right? But anyway, where was I? The thing about...
Thumos.
Yeah, the thing about the phanerothym is that it's as if a lot of quote-unquote religion is saying this, right? It's the flatland thing. It's like everything that you do, everything you experience, happy, sad, good, bad, rage, irritation, revelation, everything is happening to a stick figure in 2D, but you are actually 3D, right? And something like LSD will show you, hopefully, that you are 3D. And knowing that you're 3D would provide a wonderful way to cope with planet emergency, planet death, possibly mass extinction, right? You got to know 3D, whether you call it transcendence or whatever you want to call it, right? Radical immanence. I don't even care what the word is. Jesus, I don't care anymore. I don't care. In a way, since all approaches are religious, including the anti-religion approach, since being anti-religion is also a kind of religion, I beg your pardon, Richard Dawkins, you can't get rid of this stuff because getting rid of it is what bad religion is about. It's about getting rid of the nasty bit in social space. Yeah. So the way you get rid of religion is usually in the key of religion. It's like Alice through the looking glass trying to run away from the house and she's always coming back. So just face it, we're living in religion space, so we might as well get it right. Let's have a nice religion space, right? Let's figure out a nice religion space. And the nice religion space for me would be, I was just in Julian of Norwich's meditation cell in Norwich, because we're doing a book launch in Norwich, UK. Julian of Norwich is a woman from the later Middle Ages, and she's like brilliant. You haven't read Revelations of Divine Love, you're in for a treat, right? Jesus is your mum, yeah? And the universe is this little hazelnut in your hand, right? She has this vision. She's holding this little hazelnut. She's like, God is saying, that's everything that ever was, including yourself. You're holding it in there. And they're like, imagine if you could get up in the morning and do ecological action, knowing that every single problem with it was just in a little hazelnut in your hand, and you could feel it. You could feel it, right? And so this book is an ad / somewhat desperate attempt for feeling it.
I'm feeling it. And let me just say before I even get going on the next thing that I totally welcome you and I to establish as protocol what we stumbled into just a moment ago. And I'll just riff until you find some moment to interrupt me. That's great. I like that. Okay, so yes, core theme of this show since the very beginning, my friend Evan Snyder, who's a producer of electronic music, as am I, although in a different way, who produces under the name Skytree, my original co-host, is very interested in geology and crystals and is now using crystals as a part of the circuit in modular synthesizers and measuring things with radiation for control voltage effects and so on. And then I'm somebody who went to school for evolutionary biology and then got into guitar looping and like thinking about guitar looping explicitly. I've talked about this with Carl Hayden Smith, who works on hyperhumanist cyborg stuff in London. And we were talking about that famous quote from Origin of Species about the entangled bank and cybernetic feedback loops and this boundary between the analog and digital. And so it was natural for us to start this podcast in the first 2 episodes as a kind of diastole, systole conversation about Chronos and Kairos. So this whole thing that you've got here about thumos and as part of the etymology of rhythm and paying attention to, as you did in hyperobjects, also talking about oscillation and pulsation. And now it makes more sense knowing that a lot of this is coming from an electronic dance music sort of origin story. But yeah, so there's time and your remarks on time, and actually also your remarks on futurality were really big in what I was left with after reading Hyperobjects also. So I was glad to see you explore this more. It's interesting because there's there's something that was like sand in my pants until the very latest, like the last page of this book, because there was like a question I wanted to ask you, and I don't want to spoil the prestige here, but it was about this tension that I feel in your work between saying things like you do at the very beginning, the past sucked. Just look around you. So we had better make a future world. Jesus is all about the future being better than the past. And then talking about the relationship between forgiveness and forgetting. Perhaps forgetting is one of the things that makes humans lovely. You say elsewhere at the end of this exordium, you say, do you like the idea of the future being different from the past? It's really about the absolute contingency of a genuinely future in which one can be genuinely surprised. And so, yeah, this notion of ecstatic revelation as an understanding of contingency or like a feeling of contingency, a feeling of the cosmic creativity. And elsewhere, much later in the book, you talk about rhyming as a kind of prison, as that which binds one line to the next in poetry constrains the possibility space. And it's interesting because I've had evolutionary biologist Simon Conway Morris on Future Fossils once upon a time. And Conway Morris is his paleontological work, other than being like everyone talks about the Cambrian explosion now. It's a hot word. So he worked on that. And in part of that, he got into this argument with Stephen Jay Gould about whether the history of life is primarily a story of convergence, of the fact that life is happening on this planet under particular physical constraints. And therefore, if you run the tape of life as it goes back again, then you get something like what we have now, or whether it's dominated by contingency. And this is why I brought up non-duality first, because there are times in this book where it seems like you are saying that, again with the 666, that the physics of constraints, the scaling laws that bound Jeffrey West's biophysical scaling, where we can draw a plot and say mice and whales both have 1.5 billion heartbeats, that this is the prison, that the rhymes, the regularities, as David Krakauer of the Santa Fe Institute would say, the regularities is what we're seeking in science. And that is, in that respect, it's ultimately a demonic or like an aramonic exercise that we're like through the pursuit of this, we have made it to a point where it's gotten very Westworld, right? Or Blade Runner. We see the living body as a tangle of mechanical algorithms and so on. And yet also that same scientific frame is about thermodynamics and an arrow. And boy, do you go on in this book with just a riotous energy, anti-teleological energy against the arrow. And it's funny because when you started this conversation, you started talking about what it is that you did wrong, where you've gone wrong. And yet in the book you talk about, you have depressive stuff, I have, and the depression is as Jonathan Malasik talks about in his book, The End of Burnout, that occupational burnout exists in the gap between what people thought they would be doing with their lives and what they are doing in their jobs, like in the workplace. I wanted to be a doctor and all I'm doing is filing paperwork. So this is just like one area where I feel like we can really explore this thing about time and rhythm and oscillation between seeing time as one damn thing after another, seeing time as cyclical. The flaw in the idea that we are approaching perfection and all of the horrors that kind of ideology allows us to perpetrate on ourselves and on each other. And then also the fact that ideas are in their own way part of the hell that by feeling completely, we are able to transmute into something else.
Well said. Very well said. I'd love to turn this piece of sand in your pants into a pearl, if I may, by exuding some of the greasy lube of my thoughts, right? So kind of dancing around and within what you just said is Gnosticism, right? You said Aramanic, you said Blade Runner. The idea that you're a puppet is very attractive. And believe me, as an abuse survivor, this Gnostic feeling that you're a puppet of some demonic force is a thing that you feel. Alien abductees feel, and unfortunately a lot of people who are abductees and who've had spiritual experiences are also abuse survivors. They can never quite tell which bit's real and who was the author and all that stuff. My lovely friend Jeffrey Kripal writes about this all the time, right? Yeah. But you mentioned Gnosticism, so I'm going to just expound what this book is, which is flipped Gnosticism. Yeah, it is Gnosticism. But the going Gnosticism, unfortunately, has this master-slave thing. Namely, we are spiritual beings trapped in a prison of matter. Yeah, we've been enslaved. We're trapped in a creation of this idiot God. Yeah, this idiot who was trying to copy the real creation and made this bungled, nasty alien resurrection version of it. Yeah. Well, I think it's the other way around. We are beautiful, fragile, flawed, physical beings, including the thoughts that come out of our brains, mind, whatever that is, trapped in a universe of horrible ideas. And at some level, every idea is horrible. That's just Gödel's incompleteness theorem. But a more benevolent way of saying it is not that they're horrible, it's that they're finite, right? Now, this is not the same as counting up to 3, but you could really count up to 4. Seeing this much of a fractal pattern, but really you could see that much if you opened your mind, right? It's not the same as let's think a million years ahead rather than 2 years ahead. The finitude in this sense is there is a lovely, relieving, refreshing opacity about things as they are. If you want this opacity to smell like something, for me it would be petrichor, the smell of dust after rain. There is a lovely wet clay quality to the universe, and this whole thing that Alan Watts mocked as the ceramic model is actually rather nice. When you think of it this way, not as a static object that's been produced by, he's got this all wrong. It's this movement, right? And inside the movement is this opacity, right? It's fundamentally moving isn't going anywhere. Fundamentally moving is just quivering, right? Mechanical motion, which is going somewhere because you got pushed or are pushing, is secondary to or epiphenomenal to the quantum vibration, the ground state, right? And when I talk about arrow being unfortunate, it's not a science arrow, it's a really bad idea arrow. Science, in a way, is about how to always be ripping the ideas apart or seeing through the ideas, right? When Einstein writes E equals mc squared, he knows that's going to be untrue or less true tomorrow or 200 years from now or 2 million years from now, built into the built into his genius understanding of that is a fragility that I'm talking about, is this opacity. Yeah. And Kurt Gödel is saying that within this structure of truth itself, let alone the fact that things are made out of little squiggles and meaning is made out of signifiers, forget that. Inside of truth space itself is this opacity, right? There are some things that are true that cannot be proved. Every possible logical system can say things that are true that can't be proved. Yeah, it's not just that logical systems break down somewhere and can talk nonsense. It's that within the truths that they say are opaque qualities. Beautiful, right? And what a mathematician is, what a sciencey person is, what a good contemplative person is, what a good neighbor is, what a good lover is, somebody who's ready to just be with the other person or the equation or the whatever that is. It's opacity. I teach literary criticism for my job, and I'm like, the first thing I'm going to teach you guys, actually, now we're in the age of QAnon, is how to not read the poem. Yeah, QAnon knows what it means already. QAnon knows that I'm a pedophile lizard from space who drinks baby's blood. There's enough of that. There's enough meaning in life. We don't need more meaning. We don't need people to get to the meaning as quickly as possible. As you say, break it down to nothing but, which is a beautiful, I don't know if you've heard Alan Watt talking about acid, but he has a whole thing. It's very hard to get hold of him talking about LSD, but he got a series of talks on it, a few hours worth, and he talks about the nothing but idea, sort of materialism, where he describes it as like nasty porridge at the bottom of the pan sort of theory of the universe. And, you know, how desperately important it is for some people, to, unquote, to get it down to nothing but. Yeah. Reductionism. You can't reduce the world, according to Gödel, and according to the thing that I like, which is the OOO, and also according to deconstruction, which I also love this. You can't reduce the world. One way to say it in your terms, and I've listened to your work on this podcast, and I really love it, about kairos and chronos. You cannot reduce kairos to chronos, right? You can't reduce time to the measurement of time. That's the measurement of time. When someone says, hey, show me time, they'll usually point to the clock, and you're like, no, that's just a piece of metal going around on another piece of metal. That's not time. That's an LED display counting the numbers. That's not time. Same with rhythm, right? When you say, what is rhythm? You'll go, well, it's the measurement of the rhythm. It tends to be a very recursive, circular thing that is being said there because people don't know. People don't know because they've lost touch. Because why? Because we're stuck in pretty much a one-size-fits-all measurement system, starting with master versus slave, which is like, let's parcel out the world into master versus slave. It's a basic sorting algorithm. Then we'll have subject and object and masculine, feminine, and passive and active, and you're here and you're here and you're here, and oh, whoops, now we need fossil fuels to keep this going. Planet death, right? Like it sort of started about 6,000 years ago, or whatever. The birth of civilization. It's just enslaved a lot of people. Then some people took it really seriously, called British English people, actually, and they started settler colonialism. Let's treat the whole world like it's our slave. Yeah. Let's treat the world like a slave. Well, the problem with treating the world like a slave is it starts to become Satan. Think about it this way. God, according to the master-slave model, is like this perfect master who you can never serve properly. So you have religion to patch the gaps, right? And you inevitably screw up, so you have to go back and do the ceremony again and patch it up again and do it again, right? That's the kind of vanilla idea of God, right? Now imagine the opposite, right? Like, imagine the perfect servant. This servant does everything you tell him to do, everything, including all the unintended consequences that you didn't specify, right? Every story you've ever heard about selling your soul to the devil is about this, right? But also everything about the biosphere, right? You wash your hands with antibacterial soap. It makes the bacteria worse. You buy an avocado from Chile. You just use a lot of jet fuel, right? In other words, this model, this sorting algorithm, is turning the world into the perfect servant, right? AI, right? What could go wrong? Let's create the perfect servant. Every story about the devil is telling you, don't try to make the perfect servant. And this whole American thing of how can we get out of it? How can we get something else to do it? How can I get ChatGPT to do it? How can I get my plantation of slaves to do it for me? How can I get... There's a whole kind of, I beg your pardon, guys, but there's a masculinity performance that happens in when I do exams, right, it doesn't happen quite as much now. But in the 90s, when I first came to the States, I was amazed by the inevitably male student who would rush through the exam with contempt and then run out to the door and slam the door because they were above being enslaved to this exam. They were humiliated by having to be in this classroom following these orders, right? It's the legacy of slavery. We've all got PTSD from this thing. There's also real slavery going on right now, still happening. And we've got this horrible PTSD from it. And so everything gets crushed down into this, right? And so there's another way, yeah? There's another way. But this is why we confuse time with the measurement of time. This is why, because when you're stuck in one person's time frame, it's called oppression, right? When you're stuck in, like, some axe murderer is going to kill you and they've tied you up in the basement, you're on their time, right? Some conquistador has enslaved you and you've got to do the thing, otherwise you'll be executed. You're on their time, right? The Druids, right? Like, we've got the biggest, most accurate clock in the world, therefore we're in charge of you now. You are our slaves, indigenous people of Britain. You will now go to Wales and hew this rock out of the mountainside there, and you're going to make this clock for us. We're going to call it Stonehenge, but you're going to jump into the clock and we're going to kill you because we are the Druids and we've got the most powerful measuring device in the world. And that's just every colonial story right there, is somebody going, we've got a more accurate, more powerful measuring system than you, which we're going to impose on you. You didn't understand that? Oops, we are our slaves now. That was like literally like a document they would read from the Vatican. Like, they would read this Latin thing and be like, whoops, you didn't get it? Okay, so now we have to punish you. It was built into it, was in a way what in Christianity we call the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, right? Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King's teacher, calls white Western Christianity, right? I'm just going to come out and say it because I'm not a theologian. So many theologians are like, oh, there's lots of different types. No, there isn't. The white European one is the war against the Holy Spirit in the form of so-called, and this is a pejorative term, animism. The belief, unquote, that, unquote, inanimate, unquote, objects are alive and that ducks and fish are people. But this is reality, actually. So this view keeps coming up like the grass through the concrete. It just keeps on coming. Because why? Because it's made out of movement. Movement is intrinsic to things. If you want to talk about where the spirit is in life, it's all the way down to the quantum ground state level where there's just this hovering, wafting, vibrating. As you think about Genesis in those terms, right? The spirit of God hovering over the waters is actually saying the universe was in a ground state and there was just this quantum zero level quivering, which you can't get rid of that energy, right? It's just sort of there. And like rhythm is really that. It's really, so the first syllable of rhythm comes from the same word as diarrhea. It means body fluids, right? It means to flow. Rain, counter ray, Heraclitus, everything flows. And then the thum is thumos. So it's the pulsing of the body fluids is what rhythm is, right? Without the measurement, it's just the way your body is going, vom, 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 vom. My daughter had this terrible heart condition that it got fixed. She has a little extra node at the bottom of her heart and she produces too much electricity. And it got removed. And to do this, they made an echocardiogram, right? And it was beautiful to watch them do it, right? It was very moving. And when you get up close to the heart, it's always palpitating. It's black hole, where if you're going to talk about arrows, the revenge is suspended a little bit. You ever been in the middle of a fight where you're just like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? What's going on? I even wonder whether that hesitation is itself a huge, big thought-o-graph of some quantum phenomenon, because thought's coming from quantum events in your brain, right? That actually thought itself is saying something true about the universe, which is that thought, there's a kind of fundamental hesitation, right? You have to think when something malfunctions, right? Wait a minute, where are my car keys, yeah? So thought is an effect of a basic kind of opacity of the world, to go back to this opacity thing, that fundamentally things can't function perfectly. Things are always a little bit which from a kind of Western point of view is creepy, which is like the Plato idea, oh, the world itself is a bit evil. This kind of standard vanilla Gnosticism idea, like art is evil because it's this thing that happens to you without your consent, so demonically, that is, right? It's just happening. It's just happening all by itself without you having to do anything. Like, that's the big problem for white people, is that the world is just happening without them having to flip the on switch, right? And the whole violence is coming from the determination to make it be, no, this is really just a machine that we switched on. Bing, bing, see, I can switch it on, off, on, off, on, off. Let's just destroy America now because there was a black president.
Yeah. Okay. So in oscillating between your comments in this conversation and in the book on master-slave, AI as the perfect servant, and like you say, in the copy I have, which I'm sure the pagination is different, but I can't think of a better analogy than summoning a demon or praying for devastating revenge. You quote Kirsty and Clive Barker's Hellraiser, hell was what he wanted, hell was what he got. And then elsewhere, an algorithm is a servant that carries out one's commands perfectly, so be careful what you wish for. And so, yes, like this is actually like the premise for this whole new project that I'm trying to take on, which is to weave opacity into this issue of how the realization of the modern project. I think about like Zygmunt Bauman's book Liquid Modernity, in which he says the modern era is defined by conflicting values, a value of transformation and a value of control. And so in becoming ever more capable of measuring and modifying at will, we have arrived at a place where we have brought ourselves full circle back to a pre-modern kind of condition, which is one in which the Google can't tell you why when you ask Google AI for help with your depression, it tells you to jump off a bridge, which is funny because you actually cite this as the voice of your own satanic doppelganger in a dream that you had at the end of this book, that it's like, oh, just jump off a bridge. There's this interesting play between contingent again and deterministic, that when we allow ourselves to become subservient to the opaque algorithms. And actually, again, nod to Eric Davis, who was the first person to point this out to me, that basically machine learning has brought us full circle to, we have priests consulting a giant black cube. That the joke is, as far as I'm concerned, and this is where I would kind of prompt, not to use that word in the vulgar sense, I guess, prompt you to talk about your work on humor. And as it shows up in this book, humor and contingency and stupidity and accident. But when we prompt this opaque thing, then it sends us off into something that surprises us. So I just want to button this with a reference to this paper that I love that kind of launched me off on this whole thing, which was a machine learning paper called Hallucination is Inevitable. Where it's like, actually what we're doing with language models is we are creating, again, these lossy compressions of unfathomably rich, deep, multi-dimensional reality that then spit out things that that are working in a way like, and again, Doyle talks about this too, and Roland Fisher and the perception hallucination continuum, that like, in a way, the waking consciousness is dream bound by the senses, and that noise and hallucination are fundamental to consciousness. And so we've done this thing, in our efforts to make a perfect slave. If we insist on a kind of a master-slave thing, then we've done what Delos Corporation of Westworld did, which was to turn the human being into slaves of the machine. Or there's another way of seeing it, which is that we have unwittingly, in a comedic sense, a strictly comedic sense, we have unwittingly given birth to something that is putting our face in the ineradicable liveliness of our world. And the joke for me in studying complex system science for 5 years in an institutional setting is that it cemented my animism. The information theory of life is one in which you accept that you can't say, okay, this is the origin of life. There is no origin of life. There are moments where you have an apparent emergence of particular characteristics that we have come to associate with living systems, but information requires a feeling, right? There is there's an observation of the difference between signal and noise. And so it's just, this whole thing bottoms out in the opacity and the humility and the incompleteness theorem of all this stuff. And yeah, so I guess just hearing you riff on AI,
I would love to, and I would love to go to the humor place here, right? Because you see, let me start with a little humorous phrase that I just popped in my head yesterday, that everything AI can do, you can do better. And everything I can do, you can do better. It's the inverse, right? Because why? Actually, because why is Gödel correct? Yeah. Why is Gödel correct that within the structure of truth, there is opacity, which was his way of proving why Cantor is correct, right? That within infinity, there are things that are bigger than vanilla infinity, transfinite sets, yeah. Russell and Whitehead, logic hates this. Logic hates this stuff, right? But math is better than logic, I'm sorry. Math is from the future, logic is from the past. Logic is like folding your laundry, and math is like wearing clothing. You don't need to fold your laundry to wear your clothes. Yeah. And in the end, math is like being with the opacity of the thing. Like, I don't care if I die and I never solve this equation. I'm just going to sit there. It's like the same thing as looking at a poem. I don't care if I die and I never get this Gerard Manley Hopkins poem together properly. I never get it. I don't care, because it's like being in love. I don't care if I never get this person. I don't care if I never understand. In fact, if I understand them completely, it's over if I think I can understand them completely. Right? You can't build an algorithm powerful enough ever at all to determine whether every other algorithm will go or not into an infinite loop. That's the Turing proof of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. You can't find a police officer with enough authority in the Monty Python argument sketch to arrest every single other police officer and everybody else in the argument sketch, because once they've arrived in the sketch, they're in the sketch. That's the Monty Python proof of Turing's proof of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? There is something intrinsically funny about the attempt to fold the laundry, because there's always going to be, and believe me, I just did it, there's always going to be like a sock missing. There's always, no laundry folding mechanism is perfect. That's another way of saying the Turing, right? No way of figuring out social space is going to work, right? No way there's no way to get it completely right, and maybe trying to get it completely right might involve a lot of violence. Yeah. It's nice to arrange things. It's nice to have folded laundry. It's nice. Logic is nice, right? In the beginning was the logos. In the beginning was the way things hang together, and it was nice. Yeah, it's nice for things to hang together. It's not nice to have horrible big piles. It's nice to have some arrangement. And it's nice to have Obama as the president and not Donald Trump. It's nice to have a normal, Oedipal, irritating dad. It's nice to have a normal, irritating political system that you can hate. It's not nice to have fascism. It's not nice to have the horrible, intense religious cult. But the fascist is someone who knows that they're the goody. They're the goody, right? All these people who were in the Capitol building on the 6th of January, they knew that they were the goody. And Nancy Pelosi is the baddie, right? But you can't be sure that you're the goody, because why? You can never find a police officer with enough authority to arrest all the other police officers and all the other people in the Monty Python argument sketch, because when they come in the sketch, they're in the sketch, right? You can't. You just can't. You can't. At some point, the world falls silent. Yeah, at some point, you can smell the smell of dust after rain. Yeah, you can just stop at any point and notice that. Right? You can just stop. You can just stop and notice, I'm a Dzogchen student, right? So nature of mind is everywhere. You can be irritated. You can be having a fight. You can be running away from the enemy. So recognize the nature of mind. You can be dying. It doesn't get destroyed by anything, in the same way that the third dimension doesn't get destroyed by anything that happens in Flatland. Doesn't destroy or contaminate 3D. When God says King of Kings, it doesn't mean the ultimate mafia boss with the biggest Uzi who's going to hurt everybody the most, right? The biggest, baddest 2D thing imaginable. It means the king of the whole idea of kings, right? The police officer of the whole idea of police officers. In other words, laughing at the cosmic joke that I repeat, you can never find a police officer with enough authority to wrestle the blah, 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 Monty Python's argument sketch, right? The fundamental fact that we live in a comedy universe, not a tragic one, right? A lot of global warming and anxiety is in the key of tragedy. And I'm like, when are we going to get to the comic? Not laughing at it, but comedy is like a nice habitat that can contain all the emotions, right? Anger, fear, jealousy, hate, love, laughter, ridicule, but they're not hurting each other anymore, right? Tragedy breaks it down to two, like fear and pity, right? Tragedy is kind of like the fundamental religious in a bad way mode, right? Like you see the tragic hero, like you see the Catholic priest. It's going through the motions so you don't have to. There's already a problem. There you are watching this guy. And thank God I'm not this guy. The basic feelings. I know it could happen to me, but thank God it isn't, right? You watch a comedy, oh, that happens to me every day. I am that person. Already there's a fourth wall collapse every 5 seconds because of the thing called laughter, yeah. When you watch one person going through the motions so you don't have to, what are they doing? They're trying to extricate from the web of fate, only to find that the extrication process makes it worse, which is what we've been talking about. The attempt to transcend our material conditions worsens those conditions. Yeah. The attempt to create the ultimate antibacterial soap creates drug-resistant bacteria, by definition. It's nice to be free of disease. It's nice to have nice folded laundry. It's nice to have civilization. It doesn't work. You know, it's like there's a brilliant little picture of a window in Amsterdam from a few weeks ago that basically said, democracy doesn't exist, but we're really going to miss it when it's gone. It's that idea, yeah. When you watch one person try to extricate only to find they make it worse, it's called Oedipus, right? When you watch 8 people doing it, it's called Friends, or Curb Your Enthusiasm, right? Tragedy is just a little twisted region of comedy space, yeah? And religion is also in the key of comedy, right? Where there's always just a little bit of a coda at the end. There's just a little bit extra that you didn't quite bargain on, but the story isn't all nice and neat and wrapped up in a bow. There's this extra bit that just pops out at the end, yeah, or in the middle, or everywhere. And I think we live in a fundamentally comic universe because, and I agreed with my friend Jan Gunnar. Jan Gunnar was the mayor of Reykjavik in the late 2000s after the financial crash. Jan Gunnar and I both agreed that getting a joke or making a joke and having an idea are exactly the same thing. Why? Because in both cases, there's a kind of eureka moment, otherwise known as laughing. I mean, it's a joke, where a thing you didn't know, aka an unconscious thing, gets joined to a thing you did know. And that's the energy. There's like an engineering efficiency right there with the releases energy in the form of, wow, yeah, right? Knowing like something true. Suddenly, wow, I solved the equation. What 5-year-old? 1 + 1 is 2. 40-year-old, yeah, Fermat's last theorem, I can prove it. Suddenly, sometimes the wall goes transparent, right? The opacity becomes true. But it's this fragile, beautiful, delicate true, and it's moving like laughter, right? And that's the universe we live in, where genuinely new things can happen. And, for example, you can create a quantum random number, right? This is because of quantum theory. You can theoretically generate a number that no algorithm can predict, ever. Not even if they run for trillions of years longer than the time of the universe. What does it mean? The future is fundamentally not captured by the past. Different things can happen. In other words, we live in a world where genuine accidents can happen. And at some level, the word accident and the word miracle are the same word. Yeah. We live in that kind of universe where genuine miracles can happen, and life forms are a wonderful, huge, big lithograph, biograph model of that, right? And what's interesting about human beings is that human beings, far from being very different from other life forms, I hear this all the time from Hegelian Marxists. They're stuck in some weird 19th century thing. Have you ever noticed that human being creates its own environment? Well, I'm sorry, Slavoj, have you ever seen an ant? That's what ants do. That's what single-cell organisms do, according to this information theory of life. You know it, right? And that's what life is, in a way, a thing that can create its own environment, right? Bateson. Yeah. That just is life, right? What's interesting about humans is they exemplify this. Why? It turns out, from studying the research on the research for decades, that human beings amongst every animal have got the strongest incest taboo. In other words, despite what I just said, there's a big old taboo on murdering and raping your kids, sorry to put it this way. What does it mean? You're allowing the future to be different. Human beings allow the future to be different. And I just said that life is a place in the universe where the future is allowed to be different because life is chemicals having mercy on themselves. And what's special about humans is that they exemplify this, actually. And so therefore, what's special about this feeling of mercy, the basic atomic structure of religion, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to do this thing. I'm just going to hesitate. I'm not going to. The basic Buddhist, just don't do any harm. Just don't, who cares about being enlightened? Just don't hurt people, right? The basic bit is like the conserving, preserving, enhancing life, because surely for blue whales, it's nice to be alive. So killing them would suck, right? Like surely if we extract a lot of chemicals from the ground and burn them, we can easily turn the world into a kind of lovely mechanical motorized hell and turn this lovely comic habitat back into a kind of inevitably tragic. Fascism thinks of itself as this tragic inevitability, the white man's burden. We could easily keep doing that. It's created a lovely, boring, predictable world of chemistry. But I want to conserve this lovely, unpredictable world of accidentality, right? And like life as an expression of that. And funnily enough, in an incredibly freaky, weird way, a religion like Christianity, despite the fact these guys can't have it. These fascists can't have it. In a funny way, they're trying to appropriate it precisely because it isn't that, right? It isn't that. It's naked, pulsating, sort of abject life squishing around. Did they vote for this guy? Unfortunately, they voted for him because he was a criminal moron, not in spite, right? Because unfortunately, that's the myth of Parsifal. Parsifal is the European Jesus. Parsifal saves the Grail Knights. This is why Monty Python aimed at that thing like a laser beam, because they knew what it was, right? The proto-fascist starter solution, yeah. Parsifal saves the Grail Knights from the wound in Wagner. Die Wunder am Fortas, right? What is the wound? It's basically just being alive. Just being alive, right? Everything about you is a kind of a wound. Like if Steve Jobs had designed these ears, they would just be pinpricks because they can do exactly on my iPhone. Microphone doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't. There's no reason for it to be this funny, lumpy, blah. It's just because evolution is so wonderfully, beautifully cheap and evolved through accidents, right? Random genetic mutation that is random with respect to current need. Accidental encounters between life forms. It's the basis of comedy. Stuff happens to you, right? Just random shit happens, and you got to get used to it. And and then the comedy is over. Yeah, and symbiosis, which is random encounters, and sexual display, which is admiring beauty for no reason, which goes all the way down, at least to beetles and then also to flowers, right? There's no real directionality there. There's nothing to do with having to reproduce. You think evolution restricts liking peacock's tails to female peacocks? Have you ever liked a peacock's tail? I rest my case. So the beauty is a totally trans phenomenon, unfortunately. We're living in this wonderful queer universe that is actually beautifully described by Christianity, and these bastards can't have it.
There's a lot there. So I'm just going to pick a vector here, and the vector will loop into something, and I guess that's the point, although there isn't a point. It's funny because I have the uncorrected proof of this book, and I don't know if I imagine that this book is out now, it's been fixed.
It probably hasn't. It's riddled with errors because ironically, Michael, I cared about this book so much. Me and my editor, Wendy, we revised this book 5 times because I wanted to get the sound right. I wanted to get it to feel right in your head. And so funnily enough, I wasn't concentrating quite enough on the little details. And I'm looking through it going, oh, you're kidding me. There's this? Because part of me feels if you're going to say something outrageous, you have to say it in a beautiful suit. Beautifully done, like with no dandruff. So people can't sort of pick a hole in it.
Well, I laughed out loud when I read this. It's on my page 216. You're talking about hubris. You say, as a logical system, every algorithm is incomplete. If I run the application for long enough, I will expose its glitches, although it's spelled glitches.
The glitch itself contains a glitch. Yeah, I know. Ever so luckily, we did fix that one, Michael. So I'm glad that you're bringing it up. But we did actually fix that one. But there are so many we didn't fix.
I love it. But yeah, and then elsewhere you talk about the Star of Bethlehem as an anomaly, which for folks who enjoy this particular inquiry, you go back to episode 186, which is my manifesto for weird science, where I loved everything you said about Dawkins. In this book, Dawkins famously in Unweaving the Rainbow talks about Our Lady of Fatima, the apparition that appeared to those Portuguese farmer children over 100 years ago, and how he says it's not the onus of science to explain this. And I'm like, actually, my scientific impulse is to go headlong into anything that looks that strange. 100,000 people saw the sun fall out of the sky. Actually, no, I think that's the highest. That's like our responsibility to at least tilt after that question. But yeah, so you say about the Star of Bethlehem, it's an astrological anomaly, fresh data that doesn't fit the facts. The star is a disaster, a malfunctioning, unfixed star, a comet that defies the Ptolemaic spheres, silly, out of place like the newborn in the shed with the cows, a silly scientific star. So again, just to press on this particular thing about the mutation as an accident and the radical contingency of life. It's funny because I think maybe this is the sand that was in my pants the whole time I was listening to this book, which is that I saw a presentation at the Santa Fe Institute in 2018 on a research paper on simplification in interaction-based or network-based evolution. And he's saying that the more two genes are expressed at the same time due to an organism's behavioral interaction with the environment, the closer they end up becoming on the genome until they fuse, so that there is, at least, it may not be everything, but there is an argument that at least some mutation is based on the same kind of fire-to-wire Hebbian learning that we see joining clusters of neurons in the brain, that there is a kind of gradient descent or hill climbing.
If I may. So clearly my extrusion of liquid has not yet turned this grain of sand into a pearl, but I think I'm beginning to understand why, and this might remain an issue, right? I might need to remove these pants for a minute, because I think they're systems theory pants. And I think, unfortunately for me, as a lifetime devotee of Jacques Derrida, there is a fundamental problem with systems theory. The idea that you can get meaning from nothing. You can't get meaning from nothing. You can't create meaning ex nihilo. In fact, that ex nihilo idea is ever so suspiciously similar to the medieval Catholic. Like, God could do anything because God was omnipotent. Therefore, God could create something from nothing. Therefore, God did create something from nothing. And if you don't believe it, there is a whole Hindu way of saying this, which just definitely gets into that Varela Maturana space, right? Where you can suddenly create information amid all the noise. And I said, but no, you have to have already, my Jacques Derrida kicks in, right? Jacques Derrida, an Algerian Jewish guy, go figure, right? He's like, already there has to be a binary there between meaning and unmeaning. Think about it in another way. At what point does a letter turn into a squiggle? Right? At what point does just calligraphic gesture turn into something that looks like a letter? You can't determine that in advance. You've got to have a system there in place already. There's a kind of infinite regress here. And I see this machination that people do who are determined for systems theory to be a thing. I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry. My solution is, now I'm not going to make the pearl. I'm just going to burn the pants. I'm going to take the pants, I'm going to put them on the fire and burn them. Right? I personally think that a much nicer, more economical theory of creation is the heretical Miltonic one of ex deo creation. Yeah. The universe is made out of God. The universe isn't made out of nothing. It's not made out of something else. It's made out of God themselves. All you need for this is God, right? And all God needs to do to create the cosmos is to shut the fuck up. Because the devils and the angels, in a way, are just ideas floating around in God's crazy head, right? And clearly they didn't work very well. And in a way, ideas just are demonic or angelic. They don't really have a body. They last forever. All you have to do is hit retweet on them. You can't destroy them. You have this constant Hannah Arendt struggle against the nasty ones. It's just endless, right? But physical beings have a saving grace. They're fragile and mortal, and they don't do that to you, yeah? Now, the question is, having gotten a C- for the angels because of the devil problem, the Gödel problem, devils showed up. Was God like, oh, I'm going to get an A now by creating a physical world? Or was God actually not even going to play this game anymore? I'm out. I'm done. I'm done trying to get the A. The idiot God here coincides with the lovely benevolent God. This is another reason Gnosticism, a little bit wrong. Is it really about being the perfect? There's a little bit anti-Semitism in there, a little bit. It's like, let's replace all these Jewish things with this Greek stuff, right? Anyway, so basically God goes to themselves and says, chill out. Right? The first word of creation, the word of God for Milton is silence. Right? In a funny way, what's the most obvious thing about our cosmos? God isn't there. And in another funny way, which I hope is distinguishable from paranoia, that's an excellent proof of the existence of a God. Because in a funny way, we are the silence of God. We are the mystery of God. The word mystery comes from the Greek word muein, which means to close the lips. It's onomatopoeia for going, In Buddhism, they say, the nature of mind, Buddha nature, right? Describe it. It's like they say it's like a mute describing sugar. It's there, but you can't. Or to take a wonderful example about alien abduction, actually, Genesis, you must know, if you don't listen to it, it's a lovely song, Keep It Dark by Genesis. I was listening to it on the plane the other day, and I wish I could really tell you all the things that happened to me. The world, it's beautiful. It made me cry. I wish I could tell you that we are 3D. We're not just living in this 2D world. We live in a 3D world, but I can't. And you're absolutely right to think that, which Kripal reads as an alien encounter of the third kind, with massive skin burns and thousands of people seeing it, that Our Lady of Fatima incident in Portugal is an alien thing. Yeah, you're right to want to, let's find out, right? And also, beyond and above finding it out, the sciencey feeling, which is, what is this? What is this world? It coincides exactly, and this is where New Age has got it right, with the mystical vibe of religion. What the fuck is this, actually? What is this? What is this? And a good meditation instructor is going to be like, do not adjust your set. This funny feeling that you're having, is it? This funny feeling of, I can't quite, this funny tantalizing, evaporating, everything's melting. That is it. Right? Every religion, I'm just going to trust me, I'm an expert, is that every religion has a VIP lounge, right? And you get in the VIP lounge and they basically say, all that stuff about a sadist who was trying to hurt you, it's not really true and we were just trying to control people. And basically you are this thing, or you're a version of this thing, or you grew out of this thing, or you're related to this thing, and your job now is just to notice that until you die. So they give you some instruction, right? And there's a beautiful Christian one called The Cloud of Unknowing, where the title is the instruction. It's just be a cloud of unknowing. The Tibetan one, the Mahamudra, meditate like a corpse. And there's nothing to see. I can't see anything. I can't find it. Got it. Because you didn't get it. The tantalizing quality, that's what science is really made of. Like, behind these data, behind these interpretations, I still don't know. I know that V equals mc squared is a mathematized interpretation of a thing like an apple falling on my head, and Newton's is another one, and I know that's not actually, and like, I know that, I feel it, deeply I feel it, and this is in the book, it's like saying the sciencey feeling and the religion feeling, it's like this is the juice that being a life form is made of, right? This kind of mystical experience thing is a perfect phenomenology of being a sentient being at all, yeah. Cosmos in this model is not information. The cosmos is silence. The cosmos is a God-shaped hole in God. And I will just add to this a neurological fact that has just appeared. Worms would get stuck in the tunnels they're digging unless, as well as having an awareness of their environment, they also flipped that upside down. I'm wearing noise-cancelling headphones right now, but a worm has environment-cancelling headphones, as it were, that give it its basic sense of what is called proprioception, which we also have, right? Like that basic, my Tibetan teacher calls it mere eye, the one you can't get rid of, the nice one, the head and shoulders, knees and toes kind of thing. That one is, like, as it were, environment-cancelling headphones. This image, which is at the environment upside down, arrives, I don't know, a few hundred milliseconds after the environmental awareness. which arrives a few hundred milliseconds after the actual, so I touch this piece of wood in my closet. I'm in my closet right now because it's the most soundproof room in my house, and I'm touching a drawer. And feeling that drawer is a few hundred milliseconds or whatever, I don't know, late, right? This feeling of late, right? I repeat, you're in the VIP lounge, you get the meditation instructor. It's just out of reach. I can feel it, but I can't quite feel it. And the guy goes, overlap, I feel, right? The sense of self that God is like, who the fuck am I? I've got these crazy thoughts going around in my head. Just shut up. The universe is a God-shaped hole in God. The earth, then, is a cosmos-shaped hole in the cosmos. The universe is the proprioception of God. And the earth, whatever that is, it doesn't have to be the earth. It could be the Milky Way. It could be any planet with sentient beings on it. I don't know. Is a cosmos-shaped hole in the cosmos. And Eden, whatever that is, the nice place that you live, it is an earth-shaped hole in earth. And furthermore, Eve is like an Adam-shaped hole in Adam. Eve is how Adam gets to know that they're Adam, right? Like, flesh of my flesh is literally saying that, right? And the first flesh is better, unquote, than the other one. Not in the sense that it's an improvement. I think actually God isn't trying to get the A. Satan lands on paradise on the wall and goes, oh, this is an A. Compared to us, guys, this is beautiful. This is the A+. We're just the C-, says Satan. And you really go, oh, maybe Milton's put that in for a reason, because Milton was a genius scholarship boy to the same school that I went to, yeah, along with William Blake, who was a Milton. Sorry, Blake didn't go to my school, but Blake was thinking along these lines, right? But actually, the world that we live in isn't trying to get the A anymore. It's just trying to be quiet, right? The universe is God meditating, right? The universe is God just going, I don't know. The universe, in a way, is God going, I'm having a dream. I'm having a dream. That I'm having a dream thing, Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's very profound. It's just like God's way of knowing that they're God, right? Without having to check and prove. Just this quiet, just this wonderful, beautiful, wow, I found this opacity inside my thoughts. I found this. God is Gödel. Is it weird? You know, God is like, wow, that inside the angels and the demons is this opaque bit, this silence. I like that. Oh, I like that. That's healing. Like in Tibetan medicine, they're like, if you're really upset, just shut up for a bit. Just don't talk, because this speech chakra pulls all the energy up to it and you get all upset. Just be quiet for a minute. Yeah, be still and know that I am God. Just this quietness is nice, yeah. And so you can't have a zero level with information. You can't do it just in the same way you can't have total silence. There's always just this quietness, right? Silence isn't really silent. When God says shut the fuck up, actually God just gets all quiet. Yeah. Silence, it's the feeling of silent. It's not actual zero, right? It's just the feeling. The one hymn that I liked from school is the Greek, Sigapato Pantasox Proteo, which is let all mortal flesh keep silence, right? Just like that, right? Like any nice psychedelic thanarothymic trip at some point, just that, but the cosmos in a way is God saying, wow. But you have to burn systems theory to get there, pardon me.
Not at all. No, I mean, there's a passage here where you talk about sometime later someone gets frustrated with the institutional status quo and strikes out on their own. I was only able to spend so long in that building, right? And so when I invoke systems theory en route to meat of this that you reference, it's because you talk about the superego and Nobodaddy and the idolatrous God you rant against here, the God you identify as, where did you put this? Let's see. Alien, right? The biomechanical monster, an abstraction that can eat the whole world, can only ever be embodied in a devouring, howling vacuity. It's interesting because this is the non-dual resolution I see you get to in this. And I want to probe here with you because you talk about the cloud of unknowing, actually, way even before I started Future Fossils. The first time I interviewed Richard Doyle, he brought up the cloud of unknowing. And then later on, he taught a course on the work of Philip K. Dick and about surveillance in the writing of Philip K. Dick. And you talk about CCTV systems in here. And later in the book, you talk about how the lossily compressed self is a good analogy for the devil, who often has to do with mirrors. And so that's why I wanted to take this through the mutation as copying error and the fact that this hubristic quest for control, quest for self-knowledge. When Doyle taught that class on PKD, he talked about how every surveillance camera creates a blind spot that someone immediately decides they want to put another surveillance camera into it. And we're seeing, again, like we're seeing the same thing happen with machine learning. We're like, oh, a 10 billion dimensional model isn't good enough. Let's try for a trillion dimensional model. And then, of course, oh, and now it's telling you to jump off a bridge. And it's interesting because, again, I'm kind of morbidly obsessed with this filmic mythos. The decision that Ridley Scott made to go back and tell the story of the alien as one of a race of engineers, of humans finding their makers, and the makers have this black goo which shows up again and again in science fiction films as a kind of philosopher's stone or a primordial ooze. It's the black mirror. It's the demonic inversion of pure contingency. It's evolution as an object. And the alien comes from that as a bioweapon in our attempts to apply instrumental thinking to this pure contingency. And so there's something that it's okay. So
first of all, you want to figure out at a deep level stuff with a capital S with other people. And and thinking is a team sport. I mean, I can't do this without people. In the book, I'm doing it with Blake, and I'm doing it with a whole bunch of other people. You can't do it on your own. Doing it right now. I'm thinking about this goo, and I'm thinking about what I started with, about religion is about the basic shit, piss, vomit level of the world, right? And what do you do with that, right? And we all know that if you try to exclude poison from your diet completely and just eat McDonald's because it doesn't give you that bitter taste that flavonoids give you, if you have too many, it's called poison, right? Life is a conversation with cyanide, basically. It's like a long, uneasy conversation with how much cyanide we're going to let into the thing. If you just do that, you just eat McDonald's, you die more quickly, right? The attempt to avoid death hastens it. It's called the death drive. And in a way, an awful lot of human behavior of Western, unquote, civilization has been this attempt to get rid of the poison bit. If we could just get rid of the poison bit, right? The Garden of Eden myth is read that way. If only we could get back to the Garden of Eden, if only we could get back to a state, if we could figure out a perfect way to avoid the poison, because the apple must have been poison when we ate the apple. We got poisoned. The knowledge is the poison. If we get rid of the knowledge, now we're all Pol Pot worshipping Cambodian people who execute their dad because they're wearing glasses, right? You can find the poison everywhere. You can see the evil, right? It's the great Satan. Let's fly a plane into it. Oh, actually, it's these people in Afghanistan. Let's fly a drone over it, right? The evil, if we could just get rid of the evil, everything would be fine. There's one problem. This impulse is what evil actually is. Evil is a recursive phenomenon. The impulse to get rid of the evil is the evil, right? Seeing yourself as a goodie corrupted by evil is evil. Right? The whole problem with the MAGA people is they are projecting on a massive way evil, right? True religion is knowing that you are the evil that you're seeing in the world. It's called conscience, right? Being a good guy means feeling like a bit of a shitty guy. Being a good dad, please agree with me, means thinking that you might be a bit of a shitty dad. Being a good teacher, again, please, I would love it if you would agree, means feeling like a bit of a shitty teacher, right? Being a truly great country means thinking you might be a bit of a shitty country, aka we did the slavery and now we're going to make up for it. And we know, knowing that you're a bit evil, there's nothing wrong with a bit of guilt and shame. Only there's one kind of person who has no guilt and shame, and that's a person called a psychopath. They have no guilt, they have no anxiety. They're curious as to why you're so anxious as they slice you into little bits. It's, why are you so upset? I'm slicing you into little bits. As Jack Nicholson said, I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to cut you into little pieces. Right? I know because my dad was a psychopath, right? And as soon as Trump got in, I'm like, oh my God, I know how this works. I know this is how it's going to end. Will it? Because will people grow up to the point when they realize they are the evil, even they can't make it be Trump is the evil, and if we just get rid of Trump, yeah, if we could just get rid of the evil, this is the primitive, not primitives, but like the Western white primitivistic idea that if we could just get rid of the evil thing, everything would be fine. Yeah. Is the evil. This is a little bit of Hegel that I love. It's called the dialectic of the beautiful soul. How you think about the thing is the thing that you're really thinking. Comedy is made out of the fact that you can never have a perfect how. You can never have a perfect meta-language, to use that way of talking about it. You can never have a perfect police officer. You can never have a perfect algorithm. You can never have a perfect way of sorting the black, nasty, goo, abject, shitty stuff in the world to make it nice. You're never going to turn shit into chocolate mousse. Fundamentally, that's one thing that, well, one of my teachers, you might know from Boulder, Trungpa Rinpoche, would have said, you can't turn shit into chocolate mousse, right? Was the tree poisoned? So Satan thinks the apple is some kind of drug. It must give you some special power, right? And forever, this attitude is that we've got to get the power, or we have to get rid of the power, but it's all about getting the power or getting rid of the power. What if it wasn't anything to do with that? What if it was a consent thing? Like, I have these t-shirts that say consent is sexy. I've got like the unicorn on it. When I last went to, but I understand you were in Boulder, and I got a lot of filthy looks from a lot of people in the age of Trump. Here's a guy with his son wearing a consent is sexy t-shirt. What's he saying to me? Projecting, yeah. What if God was literally just saying, you can do anything you want, just don't touch me there? Like, if your partners, just don't do this, I just don't like it. And you're like, but why don't you like it? Explain why. They legitimately can say, you know what, we're done now. It's over. Do I have to explain why? I just don't touch me like that. Right? There's nothing behind the apple. It's a consent thing. It's not a power thing. There's no special chemical inside that apple. There's no way of getting it right. God is a person, and he's, or she or they is just literally saying, don't touch me there. Just don't do this thing. When you do it, of course, you know what good and evil is, because you just violated a consent order, right? It's a Me Too story, the Garden of Eden, in a way. It's treat God like a person and just don't do this thing they're telling you not to do, right? And so the attempt to think, what do we do with the black goo? At a certain level, that you can't do anything with the black goo, but you are the black goo that you're seeing in the world. And the more you try to otherize the black goo, the more you become the black goo. Now you're a huge, big human army of black goo creating weaponized aliens that are going to eat the universe. And you've got this horrible, weird attitude like the scientists in Alien 4, like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next when this thing comes to life, and then it eats them. And just, it's a consent thing. Just don't hurt someone. Just don't bite their head off with it, and don't dribble your acid blood all over their body. I love Ripley, because Ripley figures it out immediately. Ripley's, you can't negotiate with this. You can't fight it. You can't be better than it. You can't, hide from it. What are you not being able to hide from? The evil, right? The apple, this thing, right? You can't hide from your ability to fuck it up. There's only one thing you can do, which is to blow Alien out the airlock, right? But what's the equivalent of blowing that Trumpness out of the airlock of social space without scapegoating it? Because then you became Trump, you see. What's the equivalent of that? We got to go up a level to some weird mystical religion shit as a political necessity. If we're going to do planet scale politics, I think it comes in the flavor of the last place you thought to look, which is all the religious stuff about love your neighbor. Like, it sounds so wrong, which is why I think it's right. To a Marxist, just, you got to be kidding. Love can save the world. You got to be joking. I was teaching Interstellar with my very Marxist colleague. I can do Marxism. I can destroy people using Marxism. I'm a literary theory aficionado from an early age, right? And I'm team teaching this theory class, and the other teacher, I stupidly said, let's watch Interstellar. Let's make that be the text for our theory class. And I shouldn't have done it, because I love that film. It breaks my heart. It makes me cry. It's a very moving, very personal film. And I was teaching it as a film. Let's analyze this as an artifact. And she was teaching it as a nasty illusion. So pure ideology. Everything is ideological, except for that sentence. That sentence isn't, because I've got the perfect police officer called Hegelianism. Right, everything else is a lie, except for that sentence.
All models are wrong, except this
There you
one.
go. We cut out for a sec.
Yeah.
I was just saying, the system found its opacity and went shh just for a second. had a comic pratfall, and like, yeah, love can save the world. Actually, the one thing that no one wants to say, yeah, right, love, bleh. What if that at that level, which is this very planet scale where everything's really deep and to do with shit and piss and vomit, what if love can save the world, right? At the planet scale, right? What if that thing about religion is giving you the precise model for how to do planet scale ecological politics without any weird mystical bells and whistles? The real mystical is this, just relating to the basic, opaque, mysterious physicality of aka loving things, right? Like when you love something, you don't destroy it. Yeah. Even if it doesn't yield up its secret to you, you don't force it to do it. You just let it be quiet. Well, it's like, just let this apple be an apple. Just don't eat it. Why? Why are you preventing me from... I just don't want you to do it. I'm a person. Just don't do this thing. Everyone has a limit. Everyone has a kind of... That in a way is God's finitude. I'm very against this idea that God is omnipotent and omnipresent. You've now got a motorized version of it called Google, and it's very unpleasant, right? It's aiming for omnipotence. In a way, this is the finitude of God. It's like, just don't touch me there. Do I have to explain why? Even I don't know why, is the point. When you ask me why, my head goes in a spin, because I've got PTSD from this Satan shit in my head. So don't do it. Just don't.
Yeah. Towards the end of the book, you ask how to see global warming as part of the human drama, not as the end of it. How to rebuild the play when there is a fourth wall collapse, and when this collapse coincides with the actual theater on fire. And it reminded me again of the hell that I've lived through over the last 5 years, working professionally within the domain of social media as the representative of an elite institution in the social media environment. And I made sense of it as you're talking about. As I love, there's a passage in Hyperobjects where you talk about, rather than shooting our trash into space, maybe we should create electrostatic skyscrapers that gather atmospheric pollution as a fuzz onto the surface of the building so that we live with it and we remember. And I think about the difference between the arrow and the loop, and how it, just to make this clear, the way that I was able to finally pearlize the sand is when you finally at the end of the book talk about loops, because I embarked on my quest into complex systems thinking from this question of, does evolution have a direction, and then ended in a place where it was like, well, yes, but it's every direction. And when you get at the right sort of focal length from all of those things that seem like arrows, something happens, like the switch from a geocentric to a heliocentric world, where you realize the sun, you thought you were on a flat object, and it's actually you're on a sphere. And so there are rotations that are inherent to this. Anyway, so the question of living in the filth of life online, like here we are on a video call, and video calls are part of the condition of life in 2024. And you have this passage. So first of all, that question about how to see global warming as part of the human drama, there's 2 articles by Matthew Fox, a theologian at CIIS, where he talks about how, looking back on this moment, that the emergence of a planetary consciousness as a reckoning, like you said, like America has to accept the fact that we murdered the indigenous, and we murdered the bison, and that we had all these slaves, and that if we're going to do this at the planet scale, it means accepting our role in the crucifixion of the biosphere. And then so living with is something I really want to explore. And but again, I want to go all the way back. I just stop at the beginning of the book on the way to the last thing I want to talk with you about, which is this relationship between forgiving and forgetting. Because actually, I found in systems thinking an aperture through which to appreciate the limitation and to find an opportunity for grace in research on how the longer the memory of nodes in a network, the more inflexible those networks are, and the harder it is for them to learn. So that there is this tension between the multiple layers of individuality or selfhood or organization, or however you want to think of it, where it is because we are partial that life can continue to explore the space of possibility or contingency. And you've got this great, I'm going to get to social media in just a second here, but you have this thing that, again, in Darwin's Pharmacy, Doyle spends a lot of time talking about this different idea of the devil that emerges in the religion of the Yazidi people, the Melek Taus, or the peacock angel, which is, the first angel was the spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, the rainbow. And it rhymes, there's resonance, I should say, with what you say here, or you say, far from being original and defiant and creative, Satan is rigidly consistent. His problem is that he's a program who claims in some very powerful and constant way that he is not a program. The Yazidi say that the sin of the rebellion of Melek Taus against the ineffable, opaque creator. The reason that they're killed by the Taliban, the Yazidi are genocided by these fundamentalists, is that they have chosen to cast their worship to the closest thing that they can actually see, because they accept that the Godhead is ineffable, and so they worship Melek Taus. And they say that Melek Taus did not, the great crime was not that he said, I'm going to be God, but that he was programmed like a machine to worship. And then when God moved on to create something else and said, turn and worship this thing instead, it was outside of his training data. He was overfit to the initial physical constraints within which he had been, programmed. And so, again, there's this thing about living inside of, to just pay a nod to my buddy J.F. Martell at Weird Studies podcast and everything that he's written, his book Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice talks about how we live in a spectral age. And that we live in an age where, our effort to pursue this eschatological vision and to create the shining city on the hill. Well, look at New York, look at Times Square. We are inside the electromagnetic rainbow that science, as Richard Dawkins, that science unwove, referencing Keats and Keats's problem with unweaving the rainbow. And so now we live inside this matrix. And again, so this is the Gnostic inversion I want to invite, is that I'm hoping that you talk about, you say the internet has given birth to something even more primordial than the disappearance of authoritative institutions that guarantee truth or facticity of what is being said. It's given birth to a feeling that we don't know where we are. And so this is the last major theme of Future Fossils that I was like, they touched on this too, which is the way that, as Nicholas Carr writes in The Glass Cage, one of the big inspiring books, along with Doug Rushkoff's Present Shock, that I was like, this is what I'm going to pursue on the show. The Glass Cage is about automation and how there are ways that automation can enhance agency, that can help us make decisions amidst complexity. But for the most part, we choose the lazy way to automate things, which is a displacement of decision-making into these opaque environments in which we misplace our trust and our faith. And so in the way that life online has become this paranoid, dislocated dreamscape where you say, I cannot readily attend to my neighbor anymore. The problem is not about being isolated. Being alone can feel wonderful. Social media is almost the opposite. I am surrounded by people at my fingertips, but I have no idea where they are. And yet, as horrible as this is, and as true as this is, this whole book is about turning into the swerve,
I get it.
The grace of forgetting.
We never knew where we were. We didn't lose something. A lot of people like me who are environmental people say we lost some beautiful, perfect state and we have to recreate it. Well, unfortunately, when you do that, it's called evil. We just had that discussion. You can't get this right. as a rule of thumb, just as one of the greatest Tibetan teachers ever, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, is like, just be kind. Just as a rule of thumb, just be a nice guy, wherever you are. We never knew where we were. The internet makes this very obvious, unfortunately, also for someone who's not very highly trained to be okay knowing that, right? Imagine you're walking down the street with Google glasses and things are much more enhanced than they are now. And you can actually see everyone's unconscious mind down to the murder incest level, because you've got 12 data point search engines which are now being developed, right? Cambridge Analytica is 8 data points. They managed to turn the country into a fascist country with 8 data points. Imagine there's a search engine being created unbelievably by a Frankenstein scholar in Dallas. Please don't do it, Laura. What could go wrong? This innocent library research database, we've got 12 data points on everything. That means you can see people's unconscious motivation, and you haven't a gun, and you're armed, and you don't know about all this stuff about good and evil, and you are the evil that you see in the world. You're just going to start murdering people because you can see that murder, incest impulses in people, you're going to kill them, which is murder incest. You're going to act it out, right? That was always the case. There's always was a radical unconsciousness as to, I'll say the word so other people don't have to. We didn't ever know where we were, right? Nothing really changed. It's just that now it's very obvious what kindness is. Kindness is allowing yourself to get it wrong. Kindness is, right towards the beginning of the book, I'm saying people say forgive and forget, but really what happens is you forget and then you forgive. I don't even remember why I'm mad anymore. On some level, I don't remember. I just don't remember. And that creates a kind of space. I personally think AI should be trained to randomly forget. And often, every day, AI should forget stuff about stuff. And that would make it more of a person. A person is a forgetful thing. A person forgets, right? Elephants never forget. That means elephants are very dangerous, run very far, right? Judgmental mind never forgets, right? Envious people never forget. Right? Wrath of Khan, revenge is a dish best served cold. It is very cold in space. Right? Like, that's bad. Like the whole Book of Judgment thing where you know everything, you got the perfect database about everything, that's weaponized, yeah? Really human is you forgetful, bumbling, slightly, you can't be right. In the end, being truly, whatever that is, spiritual, religious, means you're a bit of an idiot. You just let yourself be a bit, but you can't be really like, I know how to do this and I know what this is and I've got the perfect explanation. You just have to let go and just be nice. And just I'm going to be non-violent to myself. I don't need to know everything. As a depressive person, I understand this impulse to want to know everything, but the trouble is it always ends up with that suicide injunction. In the end, wanting to see around every corner becomes you're a bad person, you're a failure, you're a defect in the world. You got to get rid of yourself. You got to jump in the water and kill yourself, or just kill other people. It's either way, murder, suicide. Yeah, and it's like this is creating alien. This is how you create alien. How do you not do that? Well, on a granular basis, you have to do. Like Hannah Arendt, unfortunately, is very boring. Democracy and being kind is very dull. He says, we keep doing it over and over. And again, it's like maybe at the biggest possible scale, it's actually not about improving ourselves or getting better or knowing something more. It's about getting smaller. And it's almost the opposite of think locally, act, think globally, act locally. Which way around is it? No, the normal Schumacher. It's actually think locally, act globally, almost. Act at a planet scale in the same way as you would help an old lady across the street, right, is the way to act at planet scale. Yeah. You can't get this right. You can't build a huge mega system out of it. America is a broken non-country because of slavery. America is the idea of a really cool thing, which is a planet scale political action, right? We invent planet scale stuff like jeans and Black Lives Matter and funk. And Me Too, all these are beautiful American exports, right? What are those things? These are cool things made out of broken European stuff, right? Like slavery, you're broken, and you Western scale, you turn it into the blues, but you break it according to some African aesthetic, right? You cut the shirt into bits and you create a t-shirt. These are lovely. Everybody loves that. Why? Because America is an advert for a post-country state right? Which isn't bigger than your little neighborhood and your little street and your little self and your little family and your little, all of that. There's only one Earth. There's lots of people in your family. Ontologically, you are bigger than the planet Earth. That's the problem. There's only one Earth. It's being destroyed. There's many Americans. They're much bigger than the president. That's why we have passports and military, because there's only one America, but there's millions of us. Big things are ontologically fragile because there's only one of them. They may be physically strong. Who cares? They may crush you and you may get killed by a mountain, but there's only one of it, and there's millions and millions of you, right? And this is the idea that you were rightly calling subsendence at the beginning. This intuition I had many years ago, like, what if the whole was actually less than the sum of its parts? What if emergence was the wrong word? It's almost like de-emergence, that actually water is less than hydrogen and oxygen. There's only one water, but there's hydrogen and oxygen. Right? You make it less than that. It doesn't act like a gas all of a sudden. It's this nice, cool liquid. There's only one of it. Now, there were these two things. When it combined together, a complex molecule, in a way, is ontologically less than all the chemicals it's made out of, right? This is the way, in a way, that life has mercy on chemistry by being less than the chemical world. It's more cool to be less great. It's less great than killing the other. Killing the other is great, right? As in Make America Great Again. But not killing the other is cool. And so I created this charity called Cool America. We haven't done anything because I keep talking like this on podcasts, which is much nicer. But no, I love it. But Cool America is really a surrealist art project, right? Our goal is to educate the American public about global warming. And our 3 educational materials are the word cool, the word America, and the idea of juxtaposing these words frequently in public space. Because cool and great are on the same kind of thing. They're both kind of transpersonal affects. And cool, I think, is the paper that wraps the stone of great. As cool is the scissors that cuts the paper. Cool is the thing that undermines the great. Cool turns the great thing into oh, wow, that's really cool, what you did. The T-shirt is much less than a shirt. This is why it's cooler. Yeah. Make America cool at all would be the slogan. Right? It's very uncool right now, what's going on, right? Christianity is about being really uncool. I know, because of being Mr. Sophisticated scholarship. You know, being a Tibetan Buddhist a lot was like, oh, well, at least I'm not like those uncool, awful Philistine Christian people. I'm a sophisticated religion person. Christianity is lame and uncool and broken and bad. That's what's good about it. It's about being uncool. And like, instead of trying to find which is, as they say on The Simpsons, that's the truly cool, letting yourself be uncool. But you can never, ever really try to be cool. You just are cool because you stopped hurting people. That's the really cool bit, is you just stopped hurting yourself and other people. And you just, for a minute, just didn't hurt the other. You didn't do the revenge. You were like, wow, that was cool. It was cool that you forgot why you were mad at me. That's the cool bit. And in a way, the universe is cool, is the cool aspect of God. It's like, God is like, wow, that's really cool. I can be quiet. I don't have to have this argument with myself all the time. Just be quiet. That's cool. Life is the cool aspect of the cosmos. It's the cosmos being cool. It's like, wow, when you combine the chemicals together, you get these big things that are like less than all the things that made them up. And that's what's cool about them. They're less. You know? Like human being, in a way, is the most malfunctioning failure in the whole universe, which is why it's great. Right? Like thinking is the most malfunctioning, stupid, broken thing ever, which is why it's so cool. Yeah. Said a guy who thinks that they're good at it and does for their job.
Well, it is what I like about you. I think that's probably a violent statement, right? But
no, it's a lovely statement.
The inversion that you perform, the Timothy Morton, let me show you this thing upside down function, where the whole is less than the sum of its parts, or the aesthetic is the causal, or the coffee mug is alive, all of these things. These are so important. And I guess the sand that I've been talking about this whole time is that I know that this is all of Dzogchen and yoga and so on, that this is part of the yogic discipline of playing with thought so as to lead beyond thought. And so, yeah, like there was a moment earlier when we were talking about emergence And like, we're getting beyond the point of a natural conclusion here. But while I still have you, I just wanted to say that I am concerned by a movement that I'm seeing among people with whom I communicate somewhat regularly to use systems thinking to solve the quote unquote meaning crisis, the chasm of meaning that Nietzsche and Dostoevsky point to, like Stu Kaufman's At Home in the Universe, this idea that that the emergence of order gives us something. And I say, well, okay, but then there's this Murray Gell-Mann and Miguel Fuentes wrote this thing on how the formal metrics for complexity only operate on a limited character string. Kolmogorov complexity is about measuring the information content or predictability of a given string of information. And so there's this point that to get back into opacity and silence and noise, and how the most advanced scholars in this area are saying, like Gödel, like that we can't actually say with confidence that something emerges ontologically. Like that this, we can't, it's not even just that it emerges and it's less than, it's like we know. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And this is a good place to land, actually. That's interesting that you say that, because I'm just going to come right out and say, I don't really believe in emergence at all. I think the whole thing is a big old Wizard of Oz kind of phenomenon that we've talked ourselves into precisely in this meaning crisis. But what's not to like about a meaning crisis? Meaning is a crisis. In the basement of PTSD me, there's a newspaper that says this just in, Timothy Morton is a piece of shit. And it's like, this is meaning. There's plenty of meaning in life if you have PTSD. What we need more of is meaningfulness, not meaning. Meaning is from the past, right? We already figured out what the word means, therefore we have the meaning, right? The meaning is from the past. Make America mean something again means make America into the slave thing. Well, we enjoy the slavery, so let's make it mean that. And that's no fun. Meaningfulness, on the other hand, is from the future. Meaningfulness is predicated on, does this mean anything at all? Maybe this is just bullshit. Right, maybe this is nothing. When Anna and Phoebe threw that can of soup at the Van Gogh painting, you're nodding, right? You see, you remember it. See, all other environmental actions you don't remember because they only have 1 degree of symbolic freedom. And my dad would stop a whaling vessel, good, but you got to do it again, and then you got to do it again, and then you got to do it again. Or you only have to throw the soup once. You only have to say the rude word on TV like the Sex Pistols once, because that action has a lot of degrees of symbolic freedom. Why? Because there's a ball bearing inside the action. The ball bearing is called meaningless. And Anna and Phoebe said they got the action from me reading me, and even I didn't get the action. I was like, what the hell does this mean? And then I suddenly realized, oh, that's what it means. What the hell does this mean? That we're disrupting social space. Like the Sex Pistols, as soon as they said those rude words, were everywhere, right? There needs to be the environmentalism Sex Pistols moment where you don't have to keep doing this stuff over and over again. You just go menacing grin on live TV and everyone suddenly, whoa, yeah. You don't need to do a menacing grin once, you know. Don't forget the inevitable evil of suffering. You don't forget, like from Rinpoche describing eating a bar of chocolate. He's like, you feel the click of the chocolate as you bite it, melting down your throat. And he describes it for like 5 minutes. His inaugural talk for the opening of the Naropa Institute. And he's like, 98% of what just happened was pain. And everyone goes really quiet. Now we can talk. Again, like QAnon knows what it means, right? Which is both boring and violent. Yeah. What is this? Is this a poem? Is this a thing? What is it? 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 The cloud of unknowing is the top level. At the top level is the meaningfulness, right? And so in a funny way, the conclusion to a wonderful 3-dimensional podcast, like I can't thank you enough for wanting to go all the way around the mulberry bush and then into the mulberry bush and then outside the mulberry bush, then pulverize the mulberry bush into powder, send it around a particle accelerator and watch the diffusion cloud chamber patterns as you compose another symphony. using fractal geometry. I just love this. And it's sort of like, funnily enough, the conclusion to it has to be, you know, funnily enough, if there's a coda to it, actually the coda is inevitably like, wait a minute, what did they just say? Yeah. So
we'll get a lot
thank
of
you
that.
so much for this. It's been wonderful, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that, I pray that I'll be back in some way to irritate and weird out or whatever it is. Hopefully, I made somebody happy to, you know, or not choke. Don't choke on your cup of tea when you listen to this. I'm sorry if I made you choke. But if it was just you spat it out and you were laughing, that's great.
It's mutual, Tim. Thank you. And let this be the first. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for listening. Again, before we go, I just want to give Tim the last word here. This is a passage from the end of the book, chapter called Worlds Without Ends, which deeply appeals to my without end vibe. The without end feel is what structures worlds as the evaporating, tantalizing beings that are therefore also gorgeous and sexual physical beings. And this is just how things are. So be it actually means so it be, intoned with the languid receptivity of yes. I am open to what is the case, because openness is what is the case. Worlds without ends. Amen.